Well, it's being, you know, a fourth floor museum, we have a little bit of an issue about how to get the light in everywhere. On this floor, we've taken too much in a way. So then, but everyone accepts that that's part of its character. On the top floor, we're taking the light through the roof, and then the question is how to take so much light, control it, and bring it into the room. And so we've done that through this very big, nearly industrial technique. In some ways, you know, in Europe this would be a north light solution, but here you don't. The issue of north light, south light is not quite the same. I mean, the sun is up there more than doing this. So this type of roof structure means that we have a lot of space up there that can bring the light, and then we have, you know, we can diffuse it and then bring it down. So I think as a top lit space, this is working very beautifully. Of course, as architects, you always want as much daylight as possible, and as curators, well, as conservators, you're not.
They want the black box.
Yeah, sometimes. And we've got to meet somewhere in between. So we have to have the ability to darken off. But again, they have their own collection. You can do a little bit more with your own collection than you can do when you borrow works. You know, the issue of conservation is as much driven sometimes by the fact that you need to borrow work. So if you're going to lend work to another museum, you insist on the conditions. And even though some museums lend work which are not in those conditions, they insist that when you borrow them, they have. So this is a sort of, this has created a big problem, I think, for all museums. I mean, at some point you have the sense there should be a moratorium and everyone should just, in a way, relax that limit a bit. On the other hand, you know, work that gets degraded through too much light is a big issue. So the top floor is optimal with good light. We can control it down to 500 lux very easily for contemporary work. That's not such a big issue, and the tall space rest. On the middle floor, we've nearly accepted that that's more of a dark box. It's more of an artificially lit space. There's one big window to the north, which the curators will sometimes close off and sometimes exploit. I know that this exhibition is going to be closed off. The next exhibition, Site Twombly, is going to be completely open. So that gives them, I mean, the second floor is hugely flexible, very good, tall spaces, and in a way, light's not the big issue. Whereas the top floor, there has to be a strong dialogue with light. We looked at all the types of stones that we could use here, and this travertine arrived as a very viable local stone, which is dense enough as a cladding. I mean, we looked at some of the other stones which were too soft. The client was also very keen to have a pale stone. And yes, I mean, it has strangely got this sort of Miesian palette, partly because we then adopted the sort of proportions of it's a sort of, I mean, it's not a literal quote, but of course it's a very beautiful language. I mean, the other paradox, of course, because we're restoring the National Gallery in Berlin. What we've learnt in Berlin is that this single glazed, cold bridged window option, strategy is a complete disaster. But in this climate, it works perfectly. You know, so actually in Berlin we're undoing this whole aesthetic. Well, not undoing it, but we're having to really deal with the damage of cold bridging in a harsh climate. But it's very refreshing when you come here and you just say, so when you let's think about the windows. What can they be? And they just say, Well, you know, they can be a piece of steel on one side, a piece of steel on the other, and we can hold the glass. You know, like we used to make windows. I mean, in a way, now we can't do that in Europe anymore because the thermal issues are such that the window frame is now this big.
Yeah.
So once you say, let's make simple steel windows, you go very quickly back to a sort of Miesian strategy of standard sections making the most simple profile. We were always worried about how such a relatively small building could stand here. And when we make the first maquettes, you know, you've got all these towers and then you have this little box standing there. The box is compromised because it's got to be, you know, the railway on one side, a road on the other, it's on a triangle. So it's a small box, not even a box, it has to be, you know, has to do this. So then you think, how can you make it strong enough to stand here? And I think that was a really, I think, you know, you ask about the materiality and the aesthetic of the building. I think that was part of the idea as well, in a way that this thing had to become a sort of little character, you know, it had to have a material power, I think. I mean, I think a glass box would have somehow got lost in here. I think we started with this idea of something very solid. Solid, and in fact, what you notice from outside, you won't see any glass on the facade. I mean, every glass is always back. So it's actually a solid box with holes in it. I think which helps its this sense of mass and form. I think the roof and the profile of the roof also came out of this sort of anxiety that it's going to be seen, you know, I mean, when you sit up on one of these cafes, I mean, it's a little thing fighting for its place. And I'm quite happy that it seems to have a personality. It seems to be by a number of decisions which were not superficial. I mean, it wasn't, its shape isn't coming from an idea of making shape. I think lifting the thing from the floor and creating this public space underneath and then sitting it on this feet, I think it gives the building a certain personality. I think the roof creating this fantastic loft, because what I felt was that when you, in a vertical museum, you have to be rewarded.
Yeah.
I mean, horizontal museums are the easiest, and in my opinion, the best, in a way.
Yeah.
If you make vertical, then you have to somehow play with the movement. And therefore, I felt that when you get to the top, it should be like a loft. It should be like, you know, you should be in the sky somehow. And it should, the space should be, wow. So therefore, you couldn't do that with a flat, you know, we tried it. I mean, every time you made a sort of flat, also the geometry, when you do a flat space, this shape, that geometry becomes too dominant.
Yeah.
And as soon as we made this nearly industrial loft, then you get diverse geometries, and all of a sudden, you know, it seems about the sky. So what I'm happy with is that, you know, that figure, that silhouette, I think is very good for its character, but it's come from a spatial idea, about an experiential idea.